Hey everyone, this is Vantage Points, a series about seeking connection during the COVID-19 pandemic. We take time to check in with our friends in and around the coffee supply chain and talk through all the unique challenges we are facing as an industry. Today we talk to Lenora Yerkes of Counterculture Coffee and Sam Penix of Everyman Espresso. This is an in-depth conversation on how guest-facing businesses are adapting to the pandemic, as well as the importance of what restaurants bring to our culture and what the loss of that culture could mean.
Not every business should be a giant corporation, and not every effort has to be a giant effort. It takes a village, and if everybody does something small or whatever they can do, I certainly wouldn't discourage that.
We need these businesses to survive. So for me, this kind of kicked back into the beating heart of why I'm in this industry, which is how I can support people keeping their businesses in as good of financial shape as possible so that they can come out the other side.
I don't just sell coffee. Come on, we are culture.
Oh, there she is. Oh, there she is.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh my God, you guys. Hello.
What a pleasure seeing your face.
Yeah, you too. Oh man.
Hi.
Welcome to the room. The Zoom room.
The Zoom
room.
Zoom room.
That's cute.
I'm just really trying to rebrand Zoom for this crisis situation. I am appalled that no one has created the Supernova Girl Zoom song meme. I don't know if this has anything to do with your childhood, but Xenon on Disney, Supernova Girl. Okay, well, I thought we were soulmates at one point.
It's a life-changing music video, though. It's a guy with frosted tips, and
it's awful.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Well, I can always learn. I have something to look forward to.
Yeah, I'll just make sure to just send that around all sneaky like. But welcome.
I don't know if you guys, you guys know each other, so I don't know if you want to intro for the
do a little
for the
intro.
group. Yeah.
You first, Lenora. You first.
Okay. I'm Lenora Yerkes. I am the sales and account manager for Counterculture Coffee based in DC. So I work in Maryland, a little bit in West Virginia, in the District of Columbia, and in Virginia. And I've been with Counterculture for 5 raucous years. It's been a wild ride.
I'm Sam Penix. I own Everyman Espresso in New York City, and I am a counterculture account, and I've served counterculture for 13 years at this shop, but before that, it was the first specialty coffee that I ever tasted. And I started working with counterculture in 2004 in Florida, actually.
Wow.
So now I'm in New York City. Yeah, and the relationship still stands, and I'm working on I always have some type of charity or goodwill project, much like counterculture does, and so right now I've been sending brewing coffee for hospitals and essential workers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because the shop is closed right now, obviously. Nobody in here.
Except you.
Me. And
What are the rules right now in New York? Is it to go only, or is it everything is shut?
The rules are that there's a list of essential businesses and essential workers, and food technically is essential. So I could be open, but I choose not to be because I'm concerned about us being the only place physically to go to get brewed coffee, and there being a line. I think when we did close on the 4th, we were, if not the only one in this neighborhood, or if not the only one in Manhattan. Like, we were pretty close to it. And though, you know, it's a risk versus reward type of thing. And when, you know, we don't want anyone on our staff traveling. I could, I suppose, keep this open, but I think when I thought about it, I realized, why don't I just continue brewing coffee and continue bringing in revenue, but do something on a much grander scale with that product. And so now we've got our shops all closed down, and I'm just coming here 2 or 3 times a day to furiously brew coffee for these like large drop-offs that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. And how are you organizing that? Like, who exactly is taking it to the hospitals?
Great question. So there's 2 ways that, aside from if I were to just walk it over, which there's many hospitals within walking distance from here, which makes this a uniquely like convenient spot for me to be running this operation. Because we are in Manhattan, we're on 13th Street and 3rd Avenue. On 1st Avenue, just 2 blocks over, and up on like 34th Street, 33rd Street is NYU Langone. So it's about a 5-minute bike ride, or a 15-minute walk. There's also the hospital, like a few blocks before that is Bellevue. And then a few blocks before that one is Beth Israel. So there's 3 major hospitals, if not more. I'm sure there's a tons of medical offices and like the eye and ear infirmary, but those are hospitals that have COVID units that are treating COVID patients. So the several different ways that it gets there, right, would be, number one, if it's a pretty hefty drop and we're doing, you know, several hundred people are going to get served, then we have a delivery partner through a company called Odeco.
Okay.
And they have basically they're an operations company that what I was using them for prior to this was they have a software where an AI that tracks my pastry sales and my waste and things like that, and it basically they'll populate orders for me that are a bit more accurate to help reduce waste and things like that. They started recently to help vendors try to consolidate deliveries, because you have a lot of vendors going to these coffee shops. Why not bring everything to one space? So they have a warehouse and they have trucks. And so the milk, the pastries, the distributor stuff like the sugar and all those non-dairy milks and incidentals, and soon paper as well. Like, these vendors will just drop off at the warehouse and they'll go about and distribute it to their customers. So they don't want to lay off their staff. They have a lot of operations people and, you know, developers, as well as like truck drivers and these vehicles. So they've been lending me their services essentially to help facilitate a really organized and safe drop-offs. Yeah, there's definitely safety procedures and precautions that are taken. We have to have a direct contact with someone at the hospital that's going to be receiving it, and we have to make contact with them as we're like on our way there, so that we're not hanging out or waiting. As soon as that contact is made and the driver calls the person and they meet, hand off, and like separate, and they're all wearing masks and gloves and distancing as much as possible. And the second way that it gets there is through a messenger service called Mess Collective. They basically, you know, it's pretty obvious they're bike messengers, but they're a super professional like courier service, and they can take up to 4 boxes of the small 4 to 6 boxes of the small, like conventional cardboard boxes that you're used to seeing at coffee shops, or they could take 1 3-gallon coffee tower, which serves 50 people. So often for the super local deliveries, I'll call them up and they can just run one of those large pots over really quickly from our shop. And then of course, if need be, and somebody's in a real pinch, and I can walk it over myself, but I'm trying to avoid that.
How are you creating those contacts with people within the hospital system?
We have a form on our website. I made in like a 24-hour rush period, I created a Square online store. So on fuelfrontlines.com, which you can get to through the Everyman Espresso page as well, at the top is where you purchase the coffee. If you scroll down, you'll see a form that's for essential workers. It's not just for hospital staff or healthcare workers. It's for the grocery store clerks, the postal workers, the UPS drivers, the security guards, everyone who we need to be doing their jobs and coming to work in order for society to function. People need to be fed, and their basic needs have to be met. So I wanted to make sure that the program was giving preference or that we were giving priority to healthcare workers, but that we also represent and give equity to people like me that work behind a counter and that don't have a doctorate and maybe aren't in the medical field, and they go to work anyway because we need them to. But yeah, so they contact us through that form, and that just shoots me an email, and that has all of their contact information and the date and the location that they're interested in getting the delivery. And then I just check my emails, and I have a spreadsheet that I created that is like our delivery roster, and I text or call those people or email them. And when I make contact and I can confirm that they're going to be on site, or they give me the contact information of the person who will be on site, then, I enter it into the spreadsheet, and it's shared with the delivery team, and we check in with each other every night to go over the next day's deliveries. And, that's pretty much how it happens. I'm also, because workers tend to be timid to ask for things or to accept things, I made some flyers and some little postcards to give out at different businesses so that they know that this is a free service, that the money has been provided by the public, and that we have the funds and the coffee and the guy, and we're doing it. So you got to take it. If this is something you would want, please, don't be shy. And the folks that I've built relationships with through, either the forum, them contacting me through the website, or, of course, I've got a lot of regulars, and a lot of them that live around here, of course, work at hospitals and work at the pizza shop or the grocery store. And I just, I make sure that in the beginning, I reached out to my community and built those contacts. And now that we've started the deliveries, which we've done 12 different hospitals and given out about, I'd say, a little over 2,000 cups of coffee since April 1st. And I hope that, we're going to do a ton more. But since that, time has passed, we've been delivering to 12 different hospitals. When we do that, they want more, and they come back, they share that information with their colleagues. And so it's not been a problem at all to grow. It does take work. You have to grow the sales, and you also have to grow the supply, the receivers, and make sure that both sides are kind of in tandem being promoted, so that one doesn't weigh out the other. I assume shortly the need will outweigh the donations that are coming in, but we'll see.
Yeah. I'm curious if you know, there are people all across the coffee industry with front of houses that are trying to do something like this, and they're coming up against their own hindrances, either wanting to just donate themselves, which is not sustainable for a closed business to do, or not understanding how to deliver the coffee in a safe way. I guess if somebody were in front of you saying, I want to start something like this, what kind of advice could you give them?
The advice that I would give them, well, first of all, the top priority has always got to be safety. So, you know, every city is different.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some cities you drive in. New York, you don't drive in, like, pretty much. So, you know, if you're here in New York City or a city like this where you're relying on public transit, if you can't get to your shop to brew this coffee, and the only way you can get there is by taking the train and putting yourself at risk, I'd advise against it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're able to reach the shop safely in your own car, isolated without anyone there, then that's a different story, right? So I suppose you have to kind of walk yourself through everything from the very beginning. Like, can you get into the shop where you're going to be brewing the coffee safely? How would you transport the coffee? Do you have your own car? Like, do you want to just kind of start small and like brew off the coffee that's in your shop going bad, like, or
Mm-hmm.
aging, you know? Not everything has to be, you know, not every business should be a giant corporation, and not every effort has to be a giant effort. Like like, you know, it takes a village. And if everybody does something small, or whatever they can do, I certainly wouldn't discourage that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are in the position to, which a lot of us frankly are, you know, a lot of roasters have vehicles, they have, you know, some staff that would volunteer, you know, but they should be paid. But it has to be done on a, you know, a volunteer basis, and they have to be consenting to this, because this, you know, going outside, period, end of story, is a risk. So, you know, I would start with the top level of priority being safety for you, safety for your staff. Then move on to the logistics. You know, basically how I'm funding this is I set up a website which is attached to our shop Square register. So it was fairly easy. No, literally nothing had to be done in order to connect it with my bank account and all our analytics for, you know, our register. It took me about half a day to make the website, because they provide a template. And I just basically set it up as simply as I could with like different price points, so that, you know, folks that have quite a bit to spend on this effort would be encouraged to, and people who had, you know, $25 kicking around that they wanted to send could also chip in.
Yeah.
And then once the website was built, I got to kind of see like what sales were coming in. I mean, I was willing to start it off anyway with nothing, because we have, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm doing this myself to start off with, so not a big overhead on labor. The shop's closed anyway, so forget about rent. And then I was pulling coffee from other accounts around town. Like, I've gotten coffee from Third Rail that would have gone bad otherwise, and from Chalet. Now, since like the fundraising has been successful, I paid them for that coffee, because that's the idea of this. The idea isn't for someone to not contribute to the supply chain and to just give out coffee and make a bunch of money because they don't have any overhead, or just, you know, I mean, if you want to give it all away, that's fine, but you know, I've been trying to pay for things like as much as I can, like the coffee that's being pulled out of shops, energy bites and bars, and any type of like non-perishable foods. But really, you brew the coffee, you take in money like you normally do, but instead of handing the cup to a customer, you brew a large pot of coffee and you communicate with somebody at a hospital, and they come downstairs and you go, "Ugh," and throw it at them. That's pretty much it. You know, if you could do all that.
Forward program.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a pay it
throw
forward
it forward.
program.
Yeah, throw it forward. But
Throw it
you
forward.
know, it's for the most part, it's common sense. But you need to be thinking about safety. Number one, you need to be tracking you should be tracking with a spreadsheet your COGS and your operating expenses, and you know, being responsible because this is a tough time. If you're capable of doing that, and you have some people who live in the neighborhood who could come over when you're not there, like I have an employee who lives close by, and I said, sure, you're bored, if you want to help, come on by. And like, you can fold boxes and you can break down the cardboard and you can brew some coffee, and you'll be alone in the space, and I'll give you instructions. You know, not too terribly difficult if you're able to delegate some things.
Yeah. And Lenora, like, I feel like you can probably speak to how you've had to be a resource to a lot of people trying to figure this kind of stuff out, right? I mean, I'm sure a lot of your accounts have been trying to figure out and navigate how to give during this time as well. I mean, people are in coffee because they care about people, right? So it's just a natural inclination to want to give, but we have to figure out how to do that in a sustainable way.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, like the single thing that I love most about my job is supporting small business, like being an advocate for small business, helping people who don't necessarily know how to run a profitable small business from the outset get started. And also, you know, helping make sure that people who generally know how to run a profitable business run a quality coffee program or quality coffee business, kind of in the midst of their profitable restaurant business. And that, so, you know, this crisis is like hit me right in my heart. The part of me that is like really pro small business, that like diversified, independent culture that we get to all be part of, that is kind of like the, you know, it kind of makes up the culture. Like we talk a lot about coffee community, and that the word community is like so hip that it's really easy to lampoon, honestly. It's like, what kind of community is there? There's so many different types of us in these really big communities, but I feel like the beating heart of the coffee community is independent business for me, whether that independent business is you know, 10 stores or one store. And I think for me, like, there are a lot, you know, I have a lot of clients, who have giving relationships, and counterculture has its own giving relationships. Generally, our giving, when it isn't the seeds grants, which I think that you guys are all familiar with, but counterculture runs grants that we set aside money the way that maybe we all ought to as individuals, set aside money throughout the year to give to coffee farmers at origin who are doing interesting programming around education of sustainability, environmentalism. Sometimes those things are related to quality, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're related to, you know, the growing their business. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're ESL classes, right, to increase somebody's access to a market. So we have those giving relationships already set up for ourselves as a company that we like when a crisis like this hits, we don't really need to go back and kind of reevaluate like what our giving relationships are. When those giving relationships are stateside, they're generally surrounding food insecurity. So in the DC region, we work with a meal kitchen up in Silver Spring. In Durham, we work with a recovery house. Coffee is super important to people in recovery, so they get some. They have what seems like an endless supply of coffee from us. So that's what's kind of interesting to me is, you know, somebody asked me today, you know, there's some roasters out there who are doing like, you know, buy this blend that's like, I don't want to call it like COVID-19 themed, but the idea is like channel the consumer's desire to give through like this blend, and we'll donate some of that coffee to, you know, COVID-19 relief. And I think that can be really awesome, especially if it's not already built into your business plan that that you have those giving relationships. For us, like it's already kind of built into our business plan. And I think for a lot of my clients here, where they give hasn't changed. And it's awesome if there's an opportunity like Sam had. I mean, this is a very special opportunity that that Sam was able to pivot to, but also had to take like, that wasn't a system that you already had set up. You had to change that and develop that. Maybe it took half a day and probably many late hours actually to like really figure out and make it work well.
I did not sleep. Yes.
because that giving opportunity was like a little bit different than maybe what you had done normally, because there's this really special need that's different than how it was 6 weeks ago. So a lot of my customers really, I think, are thinking like, how do I survive so that I can keep giving, as opposed to like, where do I give right now? And Nico, just like you said, like, how do we do that sustainably? And, you know, the way that you do that sustainably is that your business has to survive. When this started at the very beginning, there was some, you know, static that I saw about, you know, people out in the Twitterverse or whatever saying like, what, you don't have like 6 weeks of savings? Like these people should have 6 weeks of savings. Restaurants just, I know, right? That's not how our business
Fuck you.
works. And yeah, and it's great to think like that's a great goal.
Isn't that
like,
special?
Oh, well, you know what? It's like, it's wonderful planning, and like we should all that should be on our goal list. That's great. But for today,
let's feed ourselves.
Yeah, and let's like keep people employed best we can, and also to Sam's, you know, Sam mentioned this, keep people safe.
Yeah.
And I think that you know, I think we're starting to see a very sad and what feels at this point inevitable, unfortunately, impact on those frontline workers, not just in healthcare, in grocery.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes at a time when I think for a lot of people in my position, like working for roasteries, we're seeing our grocery business grow for like the worst reasons.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and on the other hand, like grocery is a place, like I'm somebody who like loves grocery stores. I think I think it's,
Me too.
I think it's,
Yes.
I think it's like, it's so comforting going to a place of plenty. And I think that probably I just opened up a window into my soul about like how I grew up, that I like love being able to go to a grocery store where there are like all these options and everything's clean and well lit, and there's like food, just food.
Mm-hmm.
It feels incredible. And so, and a lot of our friends and neighbors, and strangers and comrades are really relying on that chain. They're really relying on grocery stores, and yet those people are in danger working in grocery stores. So we need them. We need them to be safe, and there's sales opportunity because people are going to those places more, but also a really serious risk. So society, it's not just like our small businesses that don't have the the savings to keep people running for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 3 months. It's also like our entire society, where if you take one thing away, it actually puts like all this strain on the other side, and then we see pain points there. So, you know, I think that there's a lot of good work to be done in trying to keep these independent businesses operating where they can, precisely so other parts of our society are not overwhelmed. On the one hand, you want to limit exposure. Everything I've read about the viral load is like the less that you're exposed to these to the virus, the better. So you really want to limit that. And on the other hand, we need these businesses to survive. So for me, this kind of kicked back into, like, again, like the beating heart of like why I'm in this industry, which is how I can support people keeping their businesses in as good of financial shape as possible so that they can come out the other side. And that's meant, using our entire sales team to look at business model adaptations, how you can be a grocery store as a small business. I talked to an incredible entrepreneur out in Texas. He's in Duncansville, Texas. His coffee shop is called Black and Bitter, and it's very much a car culture out in Duncansville. But he switched his model to grocery really pretty quick, because he just saw, oh wow, Black and Bitter is his coffee shop, and then he has a bar that's adjoining, and he was like, we can't run this bar. That's just not going to work right now. But his two vendors are Cisco and Counterculture. So he was like, well, let me see like what the grocery store sold out of so that I can see what people need. And then he just turned all the chairs upside down and put pallets of food and supplies out. And it was really quick for him to adapt his POS. And they were weighing vegetables. He had staff weighing out vegetables using an Acaia scale, which I was like, that is incredible.
Yes.
It is such a perfect depiction of adaptation during this time.
It's like fancy specialty coffee tool to weigh out your tomatoes.
Incredible. I was just like, man, that's $150 scale.
Yeah.
Like, that's incredible. I love it so much. But
you're giving me some ideas.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'll send you this toolkit.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's really incredible. And, it's because, something that I have both like loved about this industry in the last 6 weeks, and something that has aggravated me as the voter, is that we have a real absence. I don't think I'm telling you guys anything that you disagree with. We have a real absence of leadership when we really need one. And so it's been really incredible to see the kind of leadership that has come in the private industry. Before I got into coffee, I worked in social justice. I worked for nonprofits. Counterculture is very close to the first like private sector for-profit company that I have ever worked for, which I think isn't too unlike a lot of my colleagues at Counterculture. A lot of us come from places like that, from careers like that. And the leadership that's come from private industry during this time has really given me a lot of like really positive feels, not just about specialty coffee and our community, but also like what private industry can do during a time when they see the writing on the wall and they're like, man, that guy's not going to do anything. Or like, this agency isn't going to do anything. Or this other agency is totally overwhelmed and can't do anything other than like try to figure out whether or not people should wear masks yet. So, for me at CCC, we started taking this really seriously pretty early. It was like more than a month ago that we were like, oh wait, we can't risk possibly transmitting this virus to countries that have really limited medical infrastructure. And that was really sad news for some people. You know, it's a hard thing to say, like, hey, you were going to go on that trip and you're not going to go on that trip. So, you know, we canceled OFL, which would have taken, I think, 12 people to Honduras. And that was very sad. And on the other hand, of course, they were all troopers. They were like, no, I do not want to take a virus to a place that really might not be able to handle it and doesn't really have any incidence of that disease right now. I'll wait. It's fine. And we closed the training centers pretty shortly after that, and that sent a lot of people home to try to figure out how do we best support these people this other way. So some of those models have been really interesting, and it's been honestly like it's been a really inspiring time for me to hear from entrepreneurs and deal with like the nitty gritty of like, I'm actually too depressed right now to even think about reopening my store. And I'm like, let's just talk about the real stuff. Sometimes it's like, this is like unparalleled. And then, you know, hoping that they can get to a place and supporting them when they have the capacity to reopen or to shift their model from something that they never thought they were going to do. You know, I work with an incredible restaurateur, Chef Michael Rafiti, who just opened a beautiful restaurant called Albee. It's his first spot. It's his own. He put years worth of work into it. It's so beautiful. A lot of times, you know, our customers want to go have a coffee out or have a meal out because they want that third space. He made a beautiful, beautiful third space, and then almost immediately had to become a takeout delivery place. And that is, it's, you know, it's positive, but it's totally different. And being able to kind of like check your ego about it, to shift into doing something that you didn't expect you were going to have to, actually is leadership. During these crazy times. The other, I'm just going on now, but like some of the other things that we had to do at Counterculture was redesign our production and roasting space. And I'm really like thanking my lucky stars that Brett had the foresight to relocate Counterculture to a bigger space a few years ago. When we toured that space, the first time it was full of feral cats. And it was so big. I was like, we don't need this much space. And we really grew into it. And now during these times, it means that we have more space to spread out our fulfillment, to spread out the production line, to give our staff the space that they need to keep from being too close. And also we've shifted the way that team works. So they're working in double shifts now, because fulfilling more retail coffee it's time consuming, it's laborious. It doesn't, we don't have like robotics that fulfill that stuff. We've been able to actually hire in that team, which is awesome because there was some unemployment that hit Durham, and like a lot of cities. So we were able to add people to that team, and we were able to invest in their livelihoods by paying hazard pay, because those folks are doing really important work, keeping us all working. And like Sam suggested, it's like, you know, it's not nothing to like have to come to work during this time, or to choose to come to work and work a job with other people. There isn't anybody else allowed in roasting and production, or really the building actually at this time. It's like Brett and the roasting and production team. So that floor has been closed to everybody else for probably more than a month now, to limit exposure. But still, like they're doing really, really, really hard work, and I'm really proud of them. But I'm also really happy that Counterculture like kind of took that lead for our staff early on, at a time when maybe privately, maybe I was like, oh, this thing will blow over. And other people in the company were like, nah, girl. And I was wrong and they were right. And like,
I was wrong too.
Same.
I was wrong too.
I've been exiled even as the green buyer from the roastery for this is like starting week 5 now. So yeah. But you guys just like, without even us having to ask, touched on all of the questions. Like, what are you doing for your communities and how are you thriving are like 2 of the big questions. So you just gave us so many examples of like, and I think Nico, you said this earlier, asking how we thrive right now seems kind of like tongue in cheek, but also it's like, we want to hear those stories of like what Black and Bitter was doing. And Sam, how you turned your business around in 24 hours too, because like Lenora said, that entrepreneurial spirit is what is inspiring right now. And like,
And what should be celebrated.
yes, we want to have something to celebrate.
There's no one else.
Yeah.
There's nobody else.
Is it okay to mention like
us.
the T word in this conversation?
Trump. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
you know,
The T word.
Yeah, the T word. You know, he said this thing that like all of us, if we read, we just threw up a little bit in our mouths, that, you know, restaurants will be back. It might not be the same restaurant, but it'll be a restaurant. And I just thought about that, and I was like, you know, people, you know, we have like a thriving, diverse culture of food in this country because all these people take all this risk without 6 weeks of savings to make these businesses, you know, day to day with money that's just, it's hand to mouth. A lot of it is hand to mouth. And there's no shame in that at all. That's the way that that's the way that this has often worked. It's the way that society, that like all those buyers out there, all those consumers expect it to work. And so we're not to blame for like not having that savings. That's the way that this works.
Yeah.
And for anyone out there who is kind of saying like, well, it'll come back. It's like, it might come back.
Slowly.
But
Slowly.
And the loss, the cultural loss, it is actually like a lot of other pandemics where you have like generations of young people. In the Spanish flu, you had all these young people die. So all the creative work, all the scientific work, all the product of their lives that they didn't get a chance to make because they died is lost. And that steals from that generation. It steals from our collective human history. And you see that kind of product being produced by independent restaurants today. They're making that culture happen. And where if they, it's not even like, I don't want to sing dirges about them either. I'm like, no, I don't want to go to any restaurant funerals. I want to write the ship to make sure that all these places, like, I don't want a single customer of mine to close. I had the happiest closure of a client's store a couple years ago when somebody who had been in business she'd been in business with us for like 10 years and on her own baking for many, many, many years. But she retired and I was like, I'm not upset about it. You do that. I'm so happy for you. That's the way it should be. It shouldn't be somebody losing their business before it's time to go. And I don't want to see it. I don't want to see this go that way. Whatever I can do to stop that, I want to.
And
I want to jump in there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Really quickly and just say, you know, how you were talking about the generations lost to pandemics. I mean, look at the AIDS virus and how it took an entire sweeping generations of people from a particular culture, and they weren't here to contribute. So, you know, this is in many ways, it mimics that. And I've been thinking a lot about the parallels between the AIDS crisis and, you know, me growing up in the 90s and like how I was aware of that being, you know, I was aware of it, but I didn't see the impact until I became an adult. And
Yeah.
I looked back and I thought, what would have been?
Yeah.
You know, you're so right, and it also echoes it because of the leadership in our country. The leadership in the country during that time turned the other direction very intentionally for a long time. And as you know, I don't think that this crisis in leadership it's not intentional in the same way. They say that COVID doesn't discriminate. Of course, though, we've seen that COVID does discriminate, and
By race and class.
yeah, by race and class, and that's really important. I've been watching. You know, I mentioned earlier, I'm based in DC. DC it's a small place, but it's dense, and we've seen over the trajectory of this illness, the deaths shift from the kind of the center of the city where there's more density to, at this point now, the wards that are blacker and browner. So I noticed that this morning when I saw the mayor's update, and I was like,
Yeah.
the CDC has to watch that.
70% of the deaths in Chicago were Black people, were African American people.
And if you compare that,
that's insane.
it's insane.
There's a book that I had to read when I was like a gender studies minor in college, and in one of the classes we had to read a book called Lost in Their Hands, and it touched on the loss of culture and identity and collaboration that we lose when something like this sweeps through, or when we oppress a people, just in general, what we lose as a culture. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, I was like, that was really heavy. Yeah, heavy but needed and true.
Yeah.
This is part of why I don't like. For me today, like I don't want to get ready with my dirges. I want to keep these businesses going, because you know our industry employs like Sam said, like a lot of people that don't have doctorates, a lot of people that like don't a lot of people that are wage workers that don't have health insurance, that might not have papers, a lot of people that are Black and brown, a lot of people that like don't have always like a lot of other options for work. That's something that really devastated me during the first week of layoffs was, man, it used to be like last week it was labor's choice. You could go anywhere in this city and get a job like that. It was really hard to find good help, as some people say, and because there were so many choices. And then overnight it became a place where you actually couldn't find a job in that sector at all. And if that's where you have to look, then like you're kind of out of luck. And that strikes me right in my beating heart, because small business is made up of those people that work hard to do this kind of cultural creativity for us, and we need that to stick around.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a question about. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I have a question about like you can go first, but I have a question about like other kinds of giving and like virtual tip jars and what you guys thought about that. But we don't have to answer that now if you want to come back to it.
I have a virtual tip jar set up for the staff. It was really, really helpful in the beginning of all this, because there was a lot of uncertainty. You know, I was going to make sure that people were okay. But the tip jar helped us get from the point of the shop closing, or the last time folks, you know, had a shift here, until when they receive aid. I also went ahead and released 40 hours of sick pay, regardless of what they had worked up, because I was mostly just really concerned about them having a few weeks worth of pay in the bank, because I have no reason to believe anything that the federal government says about when the aid will come. And part of the reason why we stayed open to the date that we did, which we closed on the 4th, I was waiting for that bill to pass, baby. I was watching the iterations of the bill. I had read as the good reporting on it. It's 800 pages, so I didn't read the whole thing, but I really tried to educate myself on what was going to be available to them when the bill passed. And then every time it went up for a vote, I was praying that it would pass, and it did. And that day was the day that we had scheduled our all staff Zoom call, and we got together with the other managers and owners, my colleagues, and we made a decision as soon as that was passed that we were going to set our closing date and send everybody home. We had been running fairly safe, in my humble opinion. I'm not a doctor, but I do have a lot of, like I said before, doctors and nurses that frequent this space. So again, reaching out to community, I got advice on what, at the time that we knew, what was the best thing to do. And we went to, immediately we put a sanction up around the bar. We put our card reader and everything out into the space. Eventually all the shops went to door service only. So we put tables in front of the doors, and the distance between me right now and the front door is 20 feet, and I'd just be like, what do you want? And then I'd make it, and I'd be like, okay, stay there, and put your chip in. And then I'd run over to, we have another set of doors over here. So we have front doors here and another side doors here. And I wouldn't tell them, but I would had a little stool over there, and I would set it down, and I'd run away. And I would take the door opener, and then I'd run away, and I'd go, oh, it's over there. So I wouldn't have to bring it,
I love that.
So we were really doing everything that we could to be open safely for just even a couple of weeks, so that we could get folks, some paychecks, and kind of be surfing the news and watching it for when that news broke that there was going to be aid and what it was. And then we did all the math and tried to decide, is the things that are going to be available to my people, will they make them whole? And if not, what's the gap? Because I want to fill it. I want to fill it either through fundraising or with our own money, because it's not acceptable for them to go without. Luckily, we had a meeting. We had everybody punch in their info into their own labor calculators, and we confirmed that everyone was going to be okay. And now, checks back in with them. We have another check-in call this week, which I'm looking forward to. Well, that was a hard time. It was really hard. It was a few weeks that there was such urgency. It was so difficult to run the shops in the way that we were running them. It took so much energy out of every single one of my staff to be it really did show also that, you were saying, Lenora, about community and what a coffee shop really is. I don't just sell coffee, come on, we are culture and we connect our community. And so, as sad as, and I'm, makes me want to choke up thinking about the loss or the pause of that community. But really, in those weeks, we trained people who came in here how to behave. And when we were early on that, they were like, what? I have to, and we're like, stay over there. Don't, okay, nicely. But, the systems and everything really help the customers to understand the urgency of this and how to move their bodies, and how it's not rude if you don't lean in to grab the cup. It's actually much nicer of you if you take a step back. There are just these things that are innate in us, in our body language, that are very difficult to remove so rapidly from our culture, because a lot of that is seen as like rude. It's rude to not accept, you know? And I think the value of the cafe in that sense and what we did for our community, because of the precautions we took, the good outweighed the bad. But we still took risks. And every single one of my staff members, you know, it was explained to them that there is no penalty for not coming in. All you have to do is say something. And I'm serious about that. And I'm glad that I did that, because, you know, there were points that we had to make critical, like, that communication was critical, and it stopped the spread of the virus to our staff. And people who had, you know, anxiety issues or things that they should not have to suffer through just to like come make a cup of coffee, spoke up. Stay home. No problem. There's not enough shifts anyway. We're going to make sure you get paid. People that live near the shops, who can bike here, who can get here safely, I'll pay for your Uber if we've got a few shifts left. The last week I was like, no one is taking the freaking train. Like, you know, it was something though that progressed. It wasn't stuff that all happened at once. The trains became more overloaded. They became more unsafe. Like, they were either packed because they cut service and the trains were like stuffed, or it was desolated early in the morning and you were basically at threat of being assaulted. So I was just like, you know, you're not getting on the damn trains. Like, you've got 2 shifts left. You've got 1 shift left. I want you to get that money. I'm exhausted. I do need a day off. If you're willing, I'm going to send a car. I don't care what it costs. But if you can't do that, then you're going to stay home, because that's the most important thing, you know? And it's hard. It changes. It changed so fast. It changed so fast. It was like being in, I don't play sports, but it was like being in like a football game or something, you know, like I'm just like, oh, hey, you know, like, it's just coming at you, like, and more information is coming, and you're like, if you aren't quick, I mean, God, like, they had Coffee Fest on the 8th, 9th, and 10th.
Yep.
Thousands of people at the Javits Center. What were you thinking? Okay. You know, it's now a field hospital. The last event that was there was Coffee Fest. Put that in your noggin, you know? So, like, you have got to make these decisions fiercely and quickly. Those of you who are in shops or in areas where your wave has not come yet, do not mess around with this. Like, shut the business down if you can't do things right, and make all of your decisions in the extreme and fast, and educate yourself. There is so much information about this virus and the way that it's transmitted, and it's all out there for you at this point. Like, we got it first. We were learning on the go, and that was really hard. Thank God you have this information. Like, educate yourself, take care of your people, and be like super serious.
I feel like you just really brought home.
That was a PSA.
I love it. One.
If you see something, say
Nice
something.
little slice there. Stay home, folks. But I think you really honed in on the fact that you figured out on the fly how to take care of your community, and coffee shops are there teaching people this is how you act. And so often we're those people in front of houses, like, this is rude. What you're doing right now is socially unacceptable or appreciated.
Right now,
Yeah, like, you actually don't own me. Thank you. Now let's move forward. Those kinds of conversations so often are put on people in the service industry. But you also ran through the fact that you had to very quickly figure out how to take care of your staff. And as a manager and as a person who cares about them, like, when I walk through these conversations with a nonprofit or an investing group, I have to teach them. I'm like, first off, let's talk about how this is the service industry and these are their family members that they're laying off. Like, these are families, and they're also people that are some of the most intentional human beings I've ever met. When you tell them to flip their business model, that's their heart and soul. You know, they move that direction for a reason, because they felt like maybe it gave more connection to their customer, right? Like, so when I say they're flipping their business models, let's talk about what that really means. And I think that you're such a great representation. And Lenora, the fact that Counterculture is putting together toolkits and utilizing your space and your brains to be a resource is so important. And I hope that we can. What was that, Ashley?
And a therapist sometimes when people are too stressed.
Exactly. You know, these third spaces that coffee creates, they're safety for so many people, not only for our staffs, but for community. And it's like circling back, like it's a loss. And I hope that we can hold that in our hearts, and then also support the things that, like, this is a time of reflection of who showed up for me, like which businesses showed up for me, and support them if you can. And I think we've gone through the fact that front of house people are having virtual tip jars, which I think is brilliant. Feel the front lines. Everybody should go and look at that. And as a model, it's a great model, because
and my contact information is on that website.
Perfect.
So my contact information is on there, and anyone who goes to that website that's curious about how to do it, I'd be happy to talk on the phone. I'd be happy to answer your questions. There's also a frequently asked questions section, so please check that out before.
Maybe check that first. But I also, like, it's very clear that the two of you are showing up for your communities where you can. And although this is a hard thing to answer in an uncertain time, the question is, how can the rest of this industry show up for you? Like, maybe not a customer, but this industry, how can we show up for each other?
Oh, that's easy. I mean, I have a lot of requests.
List them.
Give it to us.
Right now, I'm looking for folks who have instant coffee. So I know a lot of roasters use Sudden to produce instant coffee. I know Counterculture has your little dip bags that you put in the hot water, like a tea bag. I was brainstorming this afternoon with a nurse that I met on my first delivery, who it's her day off, and we started chatting, and she's stuck in the Four Seasons, which sounds great. It's not, okay? They're not doing any room service. There's no coffee. There's no food and beverage like that they can get when they're in that hotel. So I was like, I'm gonna send you a coffee maker, duh. But then they can't get packages. They won't let her have a coffee machine. What the hell is she supposed to do? I mean, like, she's gonna be drinking coffee the whole week, and then she's gonna have the splitting, like, you know, nauseous caffeine headache because she can't leave the hotel and they won't provide anything. So I was like trying to figure out, like, in these situations where, you know, after I've brewed all the coffee in New York City, and, you know, taking care of the waste from that, what is the easiest way for me to get people something that tastes good and, you know, fulfills that need, the caffeine need, and is lightweight, transportable, doesn't need equipment? Instant coffee, right? Now we have decent instant coffee. So I'm looking for that, and I'm looking for people to go and buy coffee and pay it forward on our website, which is fuelfrontlines.com. I'm looking for people to tag us in social media posts on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram at Fuel Frontlines. And you know, I don't know if my friends are watching and you guys want to text me and say hey and give me some love, I'll take that too. But right now, that's the two things I need.
Wonderful. Lenora, how about you?
Well, first I have to say it's so nice of you to ask. It's so sweet. It's so sweet. You know, I still am, even though I don't work behind a counter anymore, I'm like just very much in the service industry, right? That's what I do at work. And I know this might not sound very original, but the thing that would mean the most to me, honestly, is for people to support their local businesses. It really, whether that's cash, probably not actual cash, a debit card, Venmo is good. But all those places that you would normally go to, look at their websites and see what they're doing and how you can best support them. Because if you want those places to be, if you want to go have a beer at that place when this thing is over, then you have to pay for that beer now.
Gift card it up.
You got to do
Amen.
it. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Amen.
so something that I did in my personal life, was that I'm an artist, and I had a couple of weekends of painting sales where, instead of doing something that was like a virtual tip jar, well, I did a couple of virtual tip jars, but I identified a couple of places that ended up being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So like 4 individuals, 1 restaurant, and 1 restaurant's virtual tip jar. 2 restaurants' virtual tip jars. But I identified like kind of a short list of people who I knew were out of work, I knew needed the money, or whose tip jars I really was very familiar with. So I knew that was just going to go. It wasn't going to be a gift card for a restaurant, which I think is a great option, but it was going to be cash or money to people that couldn't work. And that was my way of helping out. I think that there's just individually, and that ended up being a lot more money than I would normally spend in my going out for a month, which is wonderful. But I think keeping up that energy is really important. You know, the government's, like, as Sam said, it's like the government's probably not going to be able to perform enough support. You know, there's a lot of new information. You know, I would say every 6 hours there's new information about like what is going sideways with the CARES Act today.
Mm-hmm.
And how that's being rolled out and what they're trying to do to fix it. And it's going to be really, access to that aid is going to be really different depending on who you are, and exactly like all the same boring ways that funding has always been restricted depending on who you are, unfortunately. So anyway, I think that's
I heard
what it is.
I just wanted to jump in because you were talking about how things change quickly and are basically money's evaporating is what I'm assuming you're talking about. And we just found out that so there's several different types of loans, but you would know this, Lenore, but there's the PPL, and then there's the EID, if I'm correct in that, and that may be a state thing for us, but there's a specific emergency loan that I remember these numbers. We were told that we were going to get a check within 3 days of applying, and that check would be $10,000 to hold us over while we finish off vetting and like looking at our application. And at that point, the full application and money available would be upwards, could be up to $2 million. Okay. That was about a week ago. Yesterday, Sam Lewington, who is also, you know, my partner as well as our CFO, was like, oh, by the way, I was just told that the new cap for that loan is $15,000. $2,015,000 because of the demand. You know, they did not accurately figure out the demand on it. So things change so fast.
It changes quickly, and I'm hearing from Ashley. You go ahead. I've talked a lot.
Oh no, I literally was just going to make a statement of like back to the like small business entrepreneurs are the change makers. I don't think policy regulation is ever going to make change. I always feel like it's going to be those small businesses, because that policy regulation is never quite like this, like not predicting. There's no good analytics for like what to expect, and it's never with the right like tools and mindset, at least from what I've seen in the past few years. That's like how I
Government
feel.
moves slowly.
Yeah, it moves too slowly. So regulation is never
government moves very slowly.
Yeah.
Well, and also,
and it's unfortunately in the hands of powerful people whose interests aren't aligned with the public. Their interests are aligned with lobbyists and big business that make it really clear to them that they, can profit off of these choices and aligning themselves with these businesses. And there's just a delusion there that's created, just a complete delusion that sweeps over these people, and they basically, their body has been snatched and their mind has been snatched out of their freaking head. And it's replaced with this idea that if they don't support the big business, then they won't, then if they don't align themselves with that, then there'll be a big crash, and that entrepreneurs and business is what moves things faster than policy, right? But it really depends on the type of business you're talking about, whether you're talking about an Everyman Espresso or a counterculture, or you're, talking about a Halliburton.
I think that the other thing that we're seeing here is, and this is going to tie back to the Reagan era of government, is the, a real coming to fruition of hollowing out federal government resources in terms of like brain trust. I think that policy can have like a huge impact, and I think it can, when it's well written, it can just have a huge impact on the daily lives of our friends and neighbors and comrades. So, a terrible example of this are our Bureau of Prison regulations about good time or mandatory minimum sentencing. That's legislative policy that like snapped into effect and just
huge impact
and caused devastation for 20 years, and then slowly those legislators have figured out like, that wasn't that good. Maybe we should change that. So I think it's super important. I also was really encouraged by how quickly Congress moved, since they normally can't do anything. However, yeah, I felt really good about it too. However, the way that, right, well, because they're working with a really small federal agency that has not been invested in by the federal government. We have a president now who has failed to hire the people, the actual humans that know how to make the stuff work, and he's made a practice of that for a long time now. So, and that's echoing back to the Reagan era of like, we don't want big government, we want big business. And so, some of the intention or design of the CARES Act, I think, comes from a really good place. But asking all these small banks, like banks of every size, every bank in the country, hey, here's this infrastructure, roll it out, you're good to go, it's bound to make a bottleneck, because banks make their money on risk and they make their money on interest. And so, and there's also, and people a mile that way don't know, because they don't give two shits, in my opinion, but they don't know that like the people that need this bailout, this aid right now, you're talking about a million businesses that are like one person or three people up to 150 people or 450 people. So there's a lot of different types of business in there, and it's also not just restaurants are covered by the CARES Act. It's churches and nail salons and all sorts of different businesses. So there's a lot of you know, I think there's a lot of worry in the banking industry about like who's going to end up paying the price for this, for all these loans, and I understand that they're fearful because they're being asked to process and make this decision overnight, and it's really important to note this, that those people being trusted with those decisions are not Congress, and it's not the Small Business Administration, it's banks.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't actually, like, they're not actually the people that are very well equipped to administer a government bailout.
They're having a hard time. Yeah.
They're having a really hard time.
They're having a really hard time. Our banker, we were very early. On our PPL loan, we've had it in for a few days now. We weren't even able to do anything except send our banker our information until weeks after, like, they announced that, and we were waiting and waiting and waiting. And I think, you know, I'm sure still there are banks that aren't processing. We're one of the few businesses, I'm sure of it, that got in really early and were very aggressive, and we, you know, for our size, educated ourselves very well, and were able to get that in. But we were waiting on the bank. We weren't waiting on our information. We were waiting for them to be ready to even talk to us.
Yes.
And
because
leadership is about, you know, leadership is not just about being charismatic. You know what it's really about is knowledge, and seeking knowledge where you don't have it, and building an infrastructure to make the plan work. And like, so, you know, I don't even care like what the president looks like. There's a lot of things that are drama that I don't actually even care about right now, but I really care that things are so dismantled, and it's ruining my life. It's ruining the lives of my friends. It's ruining the lives of our entire our country, and we all know that it didn't have to be this way.
And that's a really sad takeaway. You know, as we've seen this comet coming toward us, and then kind of figured out what does the path of destruction look like from this comet. You know, with conversation among some of my colleagues has been kind of like unspecified. It's kind of been like, man, this is terrible, and I'm not mad at anybody. And we were kind of in that zone for a little bit, like, I don't know who to be upset with.
Shock.
I can't. And then, sorry?
We were just in shock.
Yeah, but also
we're dealing
like,
with our own bodies and our own safety, and then when you look around,
displacement.
You're like,
yeah. And then in the end, you know, I want to focus on the positive and focus on leaders in our community that are doing good work. But you have to also say, at the end of the day, for me, it was actually really cathartic to be like, well, I know who I'm angry at. I'm angry at the government. Like, they are the people that are supposed to be knowledgeable about this stuff and supposed to keep us safe. It's not my job to do that stuff. I'm ill-equipped for it. What I am equipped to do is, you know, is support small business in my little corner of the country, and I only have so many resources to do that. And we're having, like, as Sam said, having to get like real creative about reading all that stuff, figuring out what is happening on the ground with people, and what their experiences have been, for example, with the CARES Act, and then dealing with the emotional fallout. And the emotional fallout is weird too. Again, it's like, I kind of want to be mad at somebody, and after a while I was like, oh, I can be mad at that guy. Okay, that feels good. But it's also just kind of personally made me think like, all right, well, like, coffeefam is forever. I don't know what this is going to look like in 6 months, but I know that, you know, I've worked with a lot of people that have gone on to work in different places like these two, but also, you know, 100 other people. And that connection is really important, and it remains even when, you know, I saw Daniel Lincoln outside the other day. He worked at Dean and DeLuca for years and years and years. And Dean and DeLuca, rest in peace. They went through a lot of iterations and changes and struggles. And he still works in coffee. He's not working as much right now. But he was just walking his dog, and he doesn't work with our coffee anymore. But like, he could be like a yoga teacher in Montana right now, and I would be like, coffee fan forever. Like, that sticks around. That kind of unity is lasting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the influence of that community and us all being connected and having the same value structure and similar experiences. We then see leaders in the coffee community and you know, friends in the coffee community. We're all helping each other to seed other industries with good people. You know, and the influence that you have is maybe not seen at the beginning, you know, when you start traveling down a road, but when you look back, you can really see the full picture. And the people that, you know, exactly what you said, like, you know, maybe they don't work at that shop anymore. Maybe now they're a lawyer, and maybe in a few years they'll be a circuit court judge. I don't know, but they'll have had the experience of what it's like to work for a living, like behind a counter or in whatever capacity they are, and in an industry like ours that we really care about these things and we talk about them, and we make those relationships last.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, you both, for your time.
We've gone over
And
by
so
about 26
touching.
minutes.
Yeah.
I think that we're talking to people not only in the coffee supply chain right now, we're also talking to people who our own chain affects. Like, this is a huge ripple effect. Coffee, again, is a vehicle, and food is a vehicle, you know, and I think that it's very clear that we're all just taking care of our corners of the world the best that we can, and we're seeking leadership, and we're being those leaders in our communities. And I just want to thank you for your ability to talk about your challenges and your willingness to be honest about where you need other people, albeit from the government or from our own industry, to show up for you. Because I don't think that that's an easy ask. I don't think it's easy to answer. One, show up for all of this, but also reflect in this chaos. So I hope that this series can kind of shed some light on how we can show up for one another, and also where the weak links are, I guess. Sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. Sure. I mean, it's important to be like well-rounded and honest about your feelings. And in this time, so many companies or conversations turn towards kind of like a toxic positivity where it rejects those real feelings. Mm-hmm. And yeah. I think it's really important to feel like we can say, you know, F you to the person who screwed over our lives, while also saying hell yeah to the people who are saving them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I gotta go though. My delivery of Keats energy bars are here, and I just bought all of this woman's stock that she was sitting on. She was a small business in Brooklyn, and I don't want to keep her waiting the rain.
Yeah.
But thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Sam. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Lenora.
Yeah, thank you, Lenora.
Absolutely.
Such a good conversation.